Assalamu alaikum, welcome to Ahlulbayt Live on Ahlulbayt TV, and tonight we are going to be discussing, in light of an article that the British Prime Minister David Cameron published in one of the national newspapers, stating or implying that Muslim women are traditionally submissive and therefore are not speaking out against extremist ideas that are spreading in their communities, and in order to empower Muslim women, he is going to allocate a certain amount of funds so that they can learn English. He made this announcement, and this provoked a response from initially from British Muslim women, but it has also spread around the world to try to help to educate the Prime Minister on what Muslim women are really like. So we are discussing tonight, in light of a phrase that was used in reference to the Prime Minister's statement, which is that Muslim women are traditionally submissive. We are here to discuss whether they are traditionally submissive. Please do feel free to call in with any questions or comments. My guests are Sister Zahra al-Alawi, who you'll all be familiar with, and also Dr. Sukeina Hirji, who started a Twitter storm aimed at helping the Prime Minister to learn a bit more about Muslim women. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Alaikum salam.
So thank you for, and Zahra, I think this is the first time you've been my guest.
I think I have, yeah, all those years.
Yeah. So I think we can start. I'll just start with Dr. Sukeina. First of all, I mean, I noticed on social media with regard to this particular campaign that was hashtag traditionally submissive,
Yes.
Other Muslim women from other countries were going, what is this? What's going on?
Yes.
So perhaps you can explain to our global viewers, first of all, what did the Prime Minister say, and why was there a reaction from British Muslim women?
Well, the Prime Minister actually used these words in a private conversation, and he referred to British Muslim women as traditionally submissive. So this whole campaign was actually to poke fun at the Prime Minister and say, okay, we're going to say we are traditionally submissive, but in actual fact we are not in that way. And on the one hand, it makes us look like we are oppressed, that we are concealed, that we are a hidden part of the Muslim society. But also it makes our menfolk look bad as well. It implies that our men are misogynistic, that they are oppressors, and that they want us to be hidden away, and they actually want to subject us to oppression. So I think this term, although it sounds quite simple, you know, on the face of it, it's actually a very loaded term. It implies a lot of things about Muslims and Islam as well.
I think that's a good point with regard to, as you say, I mean, it looks like a sort of a throwaway comment that he made, but as you say, you know, it is very loaded, and you had that reaction. I mean, Zahra, when you also became aware of what was going on, I mean, you've also attended the meeting that was held by the Prime Minister, and then shortly after this, this statement was issued, and you then issued a video in response to that.
Yeah.
Can you expand a bit more on that and how it links up with what happened with this statement that he made?
Yeah, so we attended the meeting with the Prime Minister 2 days or 3 days before his statements came out about Muslim women being submissive and you know, the funding directed towards learning English. So the meeting was in regards to women, empowering women, and when his statements came out in the Times, I wasn't really surprised, because during the meeting there was women who were the head of human rights organizations. There were women who have dealt with extreme cases of women being submissive, or women being silenced, or male authority dominated on them. So issues like domestic violence were mentioned to the Prime Minister, and you know, and me working with a lot of women, I know domestic violence in these cases happen in all communities. communities and all cultures. But these situations were directed towards the Prime Minister, so there was some negativity there that was portrayed to him. So when these statements came out, I wasn't surprised.
Right.
And also that he did mention about the statistics of Muslim women not knowing English. Now, I spoke to organisations after our meeting, and they said that those statistics were in fact infactual and incorrect. And you know, so I'm yet to ask where these statistics came from. But so I wasn't really surprised, because this topic was presented to us during the meeting about funding towards learning English. But the Prime Minister said during the meeting that this funding wasn't just directed towards Muslim women, but it was for all women that have learned all, you know, that need to learn English in order for them to integrate within society. But that obviously wasn't portrayed in the media. That probably wasn't portrayed much in his statement. But then after the meeting, I went back and spoke to some government officials and met with them, and they were saying that the media has spun it off to be a Muslim issue when it wasn't in that regard.
Right.
So all the titles, all the articles were in regards to Muslim women, when the focus wasn't that. That was the focus. But so I wasn't surprised when those statements came out, because I already heard them during the meeting. And but like I said in my video, that these circumstances and, you know, women being submissive or lower than men or male authority takes place in a lot of cultures and a lot of communities. So it's not a Muslim issue.
And actually, in the article that he himself wrote in the Times, you know, he actually did say himself that he particularly wants to allocate £20 million worth of funding to Muslim women. You know? And the figure that he quoted with regards to 22% of British Muslim women not being able to speak English or speaking English very little.
Right.
He says he took that statistic from the UK 2011 census, when actually the Muslim Council of Britain has written a very comprehensive report on that census, and they've actually found that 6% of British Muslims in this country do not speak English.
Right.
So there's a huge disparity between 6% and 22%. So I was just wondering about the agenda of the Prime Minister, really. And first of all, pointing the finger at Muslim women and saying, you know, 22% of you, which is 1 in 5, which is a huge number, do not speak English. And then on top of that, linking that with radicalisation, female genital mutilation, forced marriages. I mean, it was as if he was trying to enforce negative stereotypes. And then we heard later on... He was
using it as an excuse to enforce negative stereotypes.
I believe so. And also later on in the week, we then heard him come up with the other part of the policy, was that, you know, those women, Muslim women, who come over on spousal visas, if they do not learn English within a certain period of time, they will be deported back. And of course, that does nothing for integration in the society and only seeks to break down families even more and probably increase the isolation of Muslim communities.
Yeah, so actually it seems that also there was a in the meeting it was said that this is going to be allocated for people who can't speak English. Yeah. And then...
in fact, that's how the meeting ended. That was the last comments of the meeting, that it wasn't allocated just for Muslim women.
Right.
But like the sister said, it wasn't really, that wasn't what was portrayed in the article that was written.
Yeah, and this is another thing. Just to clarify for the viewers. I mean, some people might say, "Well, what's wrong with allocating 20 million to women learning English?" But like you said, he linked learning English with, as you say, the fact that they can't speak English allows practices such as FGM and forced marriage and extremism to go on. And I was just kind of wondering, well, how is it like, how is sitting some Muslim women in a classroom and teaching them English going to affect these cultural practices? That's not going to make a dent on these cultural practices.
I think what we have to say as Muslim women is that we are always for education. We want our communities to be educated, and I think amongst ethnic minority groups in this country, we have to be seen to be promoting that. So if he'd come out with a policy to say, like Zahra said, they were told in the meeting that this is going to be for all ethnic minority groups, then we would have supported that wholeheartedly. But to target Muslim women who are already vulnerable because of our increased visibility, we are more prone to Islamophobic attacks. And then on top of that, to link us with all these other negative stereotypes, I thought that actually has just made us more vulnerable today and actually increased our isolation.
Yeah, I would say I have to agree. I mean, also, I was going to say as an example, Zahra, I mean, there was a sister who said that with all these women coming out, and inshallah later in the show we're going to be talking about the Twitter storm that was set up, and we're going to be looking at some of the tweets that were put out.
Yes.
But one sister said, all of these women coming out and saying, I'm a doctor, I'm an optometrist, I speak 5 languages, etc. She was saying that this actually covers up the real issue of women who don't speak English and who are having a difficult time. And that, there were 1 or 2 sisters who said, well, yeah, I agree. The women aren't speaking English and they should be allocated this money. I mean, would you agree with that?
I received many emails as well echoing the same opinions that you've just mentioned. So a lot of people said, well, you're just shadowing the fact that this does take place in our community. There are traditionally submissive women, and the women that that portray that they are active, that they are. This really covers the issue that there is women that are submissive, and to the fact that I don't think anyone is denying that. Like I said, in all communities and cultures, this does take place. We're not denying that domestic violence or male domination doesn't take place in our communities. But what we're saying is that labeling it as a Muslim issue or as an Islamic issue is not the case, because many people like yourself and like the sister who have studied Islam can clearly say and bring evidence to prove that this has no place in Islam. Islam talks about the rights of women and empowering women, and if it was a religion that did lower the status of women, then I'm sure many of us wouldn't be Muslim here today. So I think when people say you're covering the issue that there are women that are in these positions that are unable to integrate within society, that that are prevented from education, because that scenario is also presented to the Prime Minister, that men sometimes prevent their women from seeking education. We're not trying to cover that issue or trying to deny that does take place, but like we said, Islam doesn't promote this. So I responded to a few emails. I didn't respond to all the emails, but that's what I said. I said pretty much that when you say that men are preventing women from seeking education, that has no basis, Islamic basis at all. So that's the message we're trying to portray, that women can be empowered, women can be active, women can integrate and coexist peacefully within society, and that's not an Islamic issue. So saying Muslim women need to learn English and Muslim women are traditionally submissive or anything like that, that really isolates women more and and makes them alienated within society.
I mean, another thing that kind of struck me, as you say, that there's a focus on Muslim women, because I'm sure a lot of Hindu and Sikh women are feeling a bit hard done by, because I mean, there are a lot of angles to this, and I think this is what I was, also engaged in discussions and saying, look, it's not as simple as it looks. It looks like here's a benign kind of Prime Minister, no agenda at all, just allocating some money, when previously the English lessons had been cut. So local authority English classes had been cut. So why is it now that suddenly the money's being reallocated, but with a big fat announcement, this is what we're doing? And there are many other women who can't speak English, so Latino women, Polish women, Indian women, like Hindu women, Buddhist women.
I think what we have to recognise is that there are individuals from lots of different ethnic minorities who do suffer from the same challenges when it comes to speaking the English language. And again, if we go back to the census, it actually identifies Chinese people in this country as being one of the largest groups which have the highest level of not being able to speak English well. And that's something that has never come across in the media, and no one would ever think that. And this is not about pointing fingers at different communities. It's just to highlight the fact that it's not a Muslim-specific issue. It affects Eastern Europeans. Portuguese also feature quite highly in the census, as do people from Pakistani and Bangladeshi backgrounds. So I think we have to recognise that this is something that affects lots of different communities, and it does have to be tackled because it affects the the way the society works in general. But to target Muslim women is wrong. And just coming back to Zahra's point about, the fact that, it was just Muslim women that were targeted and, are we trying to cover up the problem? It's not about covering it up. This campaign was about showing that Muslim women in this country contribute a lot, and it was absolutely not to cover up those women that are in problems. But for once, we wanted to be in the media in a positive light and not in a negative light, and I think this campaign gave us that opportunity.
I think also, in terms of balance, we know very well in the media that 99.9% of articles about Muslim women are about how they are, oppressed and this and that. They're either dangerous or they're oppressed. This is what I get confused about with the media. So make up your mind. Are they oppressed or are they dangerous? Are they scary or should you feel sorry for them? Or maybe both, a bit of both. So, there's that issue. And as you say, actually, in terms of balance of how things are presented, there's very few positive role models. And I think that this Twitter storm really took off because people go, oh, this is great, we like this. So,
and a lot of just general sort of non-Muslim English people were really fascinated by the campaign. The amount of tweets that we got from just, your bog standard Joe blogs was just brilliant. Oh, I never knew that Muslim women were so involved. I never knew this, I never knew that. And that was really empowering to have as well. You know? And I think the other thing that was nice about it was that people, really showed their sense of humour in the campaign with regards to, for example, reading Harry Potter books once every year, climbing up trees, whatever. It got the
support of J.K. Rowling, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. She tweeted everything, and she supported us, which was really, really amazing to have her on board.
Yeah, and hopefully, inshallah, and this is something else we'll talk about later as well, where this is going to go. So we're just coming up to the break now, and we're just discussing whether Muslim women are traditionally submissive. I mean, actually, I think even what those words mean hasn't been broken down. What do we mean by traditionally submissive? And one thing I wanted to talk about was the fact that actually Muslim men are also submissive in certain ways to the laws, Islamic laws. They also have to be submissive to certain laws within Islam. So we're going to continue our discussion, inshallah, after the break, and we will see you again in a few minutes. And do feel free to call in with any questions or comments. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to Ahlulbayt Live on Ahlulbayt TV, where we are discussing a statement made by the British Prime Minister David Cameron, where he said that he was going to allocate some funds to Muslim women who are traditionally submissive, not speaking English, and their not speaking English allows certain cultural practices such as FGM and underage marriage and extremism also to take place. So obviously there were many Muslim women who saw this and kind of saw a strategy behind it, and we're discussing that strategy that is behind it and giving a response to that. There was also a Twitter storm that was set up in response to this statement that he made. Inshallah, later we'll be looking at some of the rather humorous tweets that were sent out to try to help educate the Prime Minister on, who the British Muslim constituents are in the United Kingdom. So, just to continue our discussion, I mean, actually, you were going to look at some statistics.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to talk a little bit about female genital mutilation. Mainly because through my profession as a GP, we are trained on this issue.
Right.
And when the Prime Minister, again, linked Muslim women to charities that campaign for FGM in the Middle East and in North Africa. They actually say that this was a tradition that was practiced before the advent of Judaism, Christianity and Islam.
Yeah.
And, for example, in Egypt today, it is practiced by the Coptic Christians as well as the Muslims. So it's not something that affects Muslims, you know. And with regards to forced marriages, it has a very deep-seated cultural root, particularly among cultures from the Indian subcontinent. So you're looking at Pakistani, Indian and Bangladeshi communities. However, it also does take place in some Chinese communities, in Irish traveller communities, and also in Eastern European communities. So to make this the focus of a particular religion, and particularly of Muslim women, for somebody who's as politically astute as a Prime Minister, I think was really unfair. You know.
Thank you. Yes, and I think also, I mean, you know, in this country, probably up until the 19th century, arranged marriage was the norm, or even forced marriage was the norm. And of course, people would then respond to that and say, yes, but we've moved on from that and everything. But as you're saying, it's not just taking place in cultures where Islam happens to have spread, but among non-Muslim cultures as well. And I was also going to just say, slightly taking off that point, but to talk about how the role of women, as we know, within Islam, but also a point that struck me was that, and this is what I actually said in response to somebody, there was a man who commented on a friend of mine's page and just saying, you know, again highlighting this verse in the Holy Quran about the men being a degree above women, and he said this is such a hateful statement, and I don't understand how such nice people can belong to this religion. And I said to him, actually, men and women in Islam, it's about obligation, and it's about you have to submit to certain rules and regulations. Everyone has done this group agreement on submitting to certain rules and regulations. So, I mean, Sister Zahra, I was going to ask you, you know, again, because you have had a lot of programs on this, but in response to this, how would you explain the role of women? I mean, is it submissive to wear hijab? Is it submissive to to focus on motherhood, or to make motherhood an important issue, and other topics?
In a sense, like you said, that Islam, men and women are submissive to the religion and to their Lord. But in terms of submissive to the opposite gender, for us, women being submissive to men, that does...
The day we had, 30,000 tweets. So it was really amazing. I think the reason why it took off so well is because so many women felt so strongly about what David Cameron said. And they really wanted to show him, and they wanted to prove him wrong, essentially. And the hashtag itself, traditionally submissive, that was the idea of Sharina Jan Mohammed, who is a Muslim writer and author. So I got in contact with her and I said, look, do you mind if I use your hashtag for this campaign? Because I wanted it to come across in a very vibrant, in a very humorous way, so that we could say, well, actually, Prime Minister, we're not traditionally submissive, and these are the pictures to prove it. So it went really well. As you mentioned before, we got support from J.K. Rowling, and she tweeted it to all her 6.5 million followers. And then after their campaign, we were reported in all the major news outlets.
You know, ITN and
The Guardian, the Daily Mail of all papers as well. The Telegraph, BuzzFeed, and it trended in the United States and Canada, and people are still talking about it. So I think, if the Prime Minister has taken notice or not, I think he has taken notice. He hasn't given us a response, and I don't think he will. But I think he has been demonstrated to by the Muslim women that we are a very diverse community. We contribute a lot, and we will not accept such...
it's reductionist, isn't it? That's the
discriminatory statements against us, essentially,
Yeah. So that started off because, again, I got notice of that from a sister. So this is going to be starting, and could you just let people know? And again, I mean, I've never been involved in something like that, and I thought, oh, let me also participate. I mean, I didn't expect it to take off in that way. I thought there would be a few people. But I think the thing that surprised me as well is, as you said, how it spread, globally, and actually was picked up by not only the mainstream media outlets, but also such a diverse range of non-Muslim people who are just liking and tweeting and liking and tweeting. Yeah.
And they all like the fact that they say that we gave David Cameron a good hiding, and I thought that was really really good of them to point out.
Yeah. No, that was good. So we're just going to look at some of these tweets actually, and have a little discussion on some of the content. So
so this was actually a really good tweet that was posted by a non-Muslim gentleman, showing our Prime Minister bowing down to King Abdullah, the previous king of Saudi Arabia. And I think this just demonstrates how submissive our politicians are to money, oil and wealth.
Yeah.
So, he's saying that Muslim women are traditionally submissive, but actually he's quite submissive too.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. And this is Sister
Sukeina, yes. And she's the one who came up with the idea of the hashtag. And she speaks, she's speaking here on the Today programme, which is certainly not a very easy programme to go on to and be interviewed on. And she gave a lot of support to me throughout the campaign. And she really sort of helped to build the momentum for the campaign as well.
That's good.
And this specific tweet I really loved, because this campaign did not just inspire people from our generation, it's inspired a lot of women from our mother's generation. And it just shows that, even, our mothers, they have contributed a lot to British society, as well as raising us and being new to this society when they first moved over.
I like that touch with the cup of tea as well.
That's really British,
it is,
isn't it?
Yeah.
And this Muslim sister, she works in the legal profession, which is a very male-dominated profession, and she's succeeding really well.
Yeah, she's a judge, as we can see.
And I really like this tweet. This was actually taken up by a member of the Scottish Parliament, Hamza Youssef. And I believe he is the shadow foreign minister as well.
Right.
And he got involved in the campaign. He got all the members of his family to tweet a picture with him and showing how educated they are. And I think this is really important, that Muslim men were also really offended by what the Prime Minister said.
True.
And him being a Muslim man, he really wanted to say that actually I really want the women and everyone in my family to be educated, and they're not submissive at all.
Yeah.
And this sister, she is an artist. She works in photojournalism. She also claims to be a tree hugger. And I think this just brought on, a lot of vibrancy and humour to the campaign.
Yeah, people were saying their hobbies and, saying, hello, I'm normal.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And this particular lady, it's quite interesting. I bumped into her through work, and we got talking about the campaign, so she agreed to get involved. And I found out later that she's a Star Wars fan, and she's quite keen on getting her children into Star Wars as well.
Right.
And I think this particular picture highlights the fact that Muslim women, particularly who are facing oppression on a daily basis in, for example, the occupied territories, these women are absolutely not submissive. They resist every day through whatever means they have to resist against the Israeli occupation.
Yeah, this was a woman who's telling some Israeli soldiers to get out
of her house. And Palestinian women on a daily basis, they work in hospitals which have no equipment, which have no electricity, and they strive really, really hard to serve the oppressed people, that are just so subjugated. And I think this particularly highlights, a Muslim woman who is very prominent, and she was actually given prominence by a lot of Western governments, including our own, and she is absolutely not submissive. She's leading a whole campaign against terrorism and using education as a tool.
Yeah.
So this was a really poignant tweet, I felt.
I think that's the last one. That's a small sample, but if people do want to look at more tweets, they just and they are on Twitter, then you just do the hashtag traditionally submissive.
That's right.
And then they'll be able to see, the sheer range coming up.
Yeah.
I was quite amused, and I posted this up of a lady who also took part in the campaign, and she addressed the Prime Minister as Kamran. Dear PM Kamran. So, I thought that was a nice adaptation of his name. He's integrating with Muslim society. Yeah. Also, I was going to say some of the criticisms that were coming from people with regard to this campaign, as I noticed, was that number one, I mean, obviously we talked about how some Muslim women have said you're covering up the real issue of women who aren't speaking in English, but also some obviously sceptical non-Muslims were saying, well, look at these Muslim women in the West, trying to make. In fact, this was a statement that someone did make. Well, look at these Muslim women in the West trying to make their third world sisters look hip or look cool or something like that. So the take that some people had was, well, if you have done well in Western countries, then it's all thanks to you being in a Western country.
Yes, it's got nothing to do with your religion, and actually we are the ones that you should be grateful to. And I think that again comes from that kind of colonialist mindset. And I think what we have to do is look at the Muslim world in general. We do have examples of contemporary Muslim women nowadays who are doing a lot for their countries. I mean, we just have to look at the lady, just have to try and bring up her details. So Tawakkul Karman, who is the Nobel Peace Prize winner, and she is a human rights activist in Yemen. She is a prominent Muslim woman. So, yes, there probably are barriers to women in all societies. And let's not forget that gender inequality exists in the United Kingdom as well, and it's actually getting worse according to the latest statistics as well. We were number one in terms of trying to stamp out gender inequality in 2006, but we've now fallen to number 32, and we're behind Burundi and Burkina Faso. So, I mean, I think we have to put this into perspective. The other thing is that we have to look at, for example, in Pakistan, there is a lady by the name of Mariam Sultana who has a doctorate in astrophysics. Then the first female prime minister in Bangladesh in 1991, her name was Khalida Zia. And then we have the president of Indonesia, which is the most populous Muslim country in the world, was a woman in 2001, and her name was Megawati Sukarno Putri.
Oh, yes, I remember her.
So we do have exampls of Muslim women living in so-called third world Muslim countries who are excelling, who are very prominent. This achievements is got really, yes, it is from the country that we live in, but it is not because of that. We have our own drive. We have our own abilities as well, and we all believe that education is the right way forward.
Where do you think this is going to go now? Because, as you say, it took off immensely, and you're sort of wondering what the next step is with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think where I would like to see the campaign going is, like I mentioned before, with us as Muslims getting involved in our communities locally. On the one hand, and trying to address the injustices that exist with the communities with regards to helping disabled people, with regards to helping those who may come from more deprived backgrounds as well, and trying to get them into education and trying to address the barriers that they face. But I think on a more national level, I think we as Muslims have to recognise that we do have to be more engaged politically. And one of the debates that I was involved in last time with the general election was, should we be getting involved in voting? And I think, the political landscape now means that we absolutely have to. We cannot afford to continue being discriminated against. We have to take a role, we have to vote at the bare minimum, but also get involved in the political parties and say, we are here. We also want to get involved on a general level in the society, but we want you to recognise us as well.
Yeah. Sister Zahra, you're going to say make one point. In fact, you got a message through about also the Trevor Phillips making a statement about.
Yeah. So today the media outlets reported on Trevor Phillips, and he stated that Muslims will never integrate within society. They view the world completely different than ourselves, and there's no way that that Muslim communities will change. And he was the former chief of Watchdog, the rights equalities. So it was a big statement. People are saying whether the media have misquoted or not, but it's a big statement to say that Muslims will never integrate, and this is what we're constantly dealing with. This is what we're constantly fighting against, and all these misconceptions brought about Islam. Just mentioning, you said that a lot of people say, oh, thanks to the West that we have these rights. Well, you know, if we look back in the time of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you see, this is one of the tweets I mentioned about this campaign. I said Khadija alayhi salam, she was a businesswoman, and in fact, we have a hadith that say if it wasn't for Khadija's wealth, then Islam wouldn't have prospered. So it was down to a woman that Islam spread as it did. We look at Zahra alayhi salam, when she faced injustice, she went out and spoke to the public, and that shows the embodiment of a true woman and a powerful woman, shall I say. And Sayyidina Zainab alayhi salam, her stand in Karbala, all these women portray to us a true powerful woman. And the rights of women was brought to Islam way before these countries had, you know, brought these rights to inheritance, and all these rights given to women was established. Islam established it and gave those rights to women before here. So and then a lot of people say, well, look at the Islamic countries now. Well, I wouldn't say the actions of many of the governments which call themselves Islamic portrays the right and correct you know, the image of Islam or the regulations and the rules of Islam. So look, a lot of people say, oh, Saudi Arabia don't let women drive and they don't do this and they do this. Well, I don't consider Saudi Arabia abiding to the correct teachings of Islam at all. So bringing that argument forth and saying, look at those Islamic countries, I wouldn't say that at all. So so that's a point to make as well, that a lot of people bring forth these arguments and say, look at these countries, when I wouldn't say they represent Islam.
I think also that the view that people have, and this is a point that I made as well, that the view that people have in the West of Muslim countries is actually behind. You know, it's about 20-30 years behind, if not more, because Muslim countries, you know, or majority Muslim countries have you know, the women are very active and very socially aware, very you know, savvy with the social media, well educated, operating in all areas of the society. So you know, this idea that that you know, they are sort of living in silence and you know, not having any voice and not participating is that is inaccurate anyway.
It's inaccurate, I mean, I'm from the Middle East. I go back to my country, and majority of the women are working. In fact, I see, if you're going to say, oh, women just, a lot of people say Muslim women, they just stay at home and take money from the benefits, and someone actually tweeted that, but that's not the case at all. There's a lot of women that work, and especially in our countries, you say, oh, women over there, go back to your country and stay at home or do whatever you want. When I go back to my country, if you go to Bahrain, Kuwait, you'll see majority of the women out there working, and you know, have influential roles within society and have a say in society. So to say those countries as well oppress women, I think, like you said, it's not an accurate portrayal of the Islamic countries as well.
I think a lot of Muslim society is also quite matriarchal, where it's really the women that wear the trousers in the family. I mean, we were discussing about Iran just before we came onto the show, and you know, we've seen how involved women were, for example, in the revolution. In fact, Imam Khomeini said, you know, to the Shah in the 1960s when he was asked, oh, where's your army? And he said they're in the laps of their mothers. And everyone laughed at him at that point, but he was right. And because of the women, and I think it should be recognised, it's because of the women in Iran that actually the revolution happened, because they wanted to get rid of the oppression that they were under and the imperialism as well, and they managed to do that.
I think also, again, something that is not understood, you know, another thing about, you know, the hijab and being forced to wear hijab and forced to cover, and that's an issue as well, that, you know, if you wear hijab, then you're submissive, it must mean you're submissive. But actually the reality is, and I've heard this from many Muslim friends over the years, that in many Muslim majority countries, if you are a woman with hijab, you're not actually allowed to go to, it's actually the state that doesn't allow you to go to university. So many years ago I had a friend from Kenya who won a scholarship to Italy, and she said that when she was in Kenya she was not able to wear her hijab at university or graduate with hijab. So then this is another issue, that actually it's not that we could say that it's complex. It's not that, yes, some women may be compelled to wear hijab against their will, but there's also a lot of women who are compelled not to against their will as well, and that's not being addressed.
And I think a lot of the debate in the media, that you have some very prominent writers who say, Muslim women, they're being forced to wear it, and they should take it off. I mean, just because they think it's wrong, who are they to come and tell us what to wear and what not to wear? They're always talking about liberalism and feminism, but it only applies to them. It doesn't apply to Muslim women, and they're being quite selective in that.
So we've just got a few minutes, and Sister Zahra, I was going to say, perhaps because you've got so much experience of obviously working in media, not just that, but being a mother as well. And speaking to your generation as well. I mean, again, what would your words of advice or your thoughts be to Muslim women who are growing up in this country of your generation?
The first thing I say, which I echo in majority of my shows, is that Muslim women need to take an active role, and a lot of women do, and that's why we try to inspire the younger generation, because we're now growing up, and the younger women will have a huge role to play within society. And I would say the challenges that young women face now is even greater than what we face. When I was growing up, I don't remember Islam being attacked to that extent within the media and in society. Islamophobia statistics have showed that has increased dramatically, to the extent that the government are now reporting it as a hate crime. So, I would say that women need an even greater role to be representatives in their communities, to be representatives in their societies, to ensure that they take a huge role and play a huge role within society. On a daily basis, I'm sure as yourself and the channel, we get emails from young women struggling in this society, women who want to wear hijab but feel as if they can't, because of one hand you have discrimination from the general public and Islamophobia. So, actually today I was speaking to a young girl, and she was saying in school there was this boy that was bullying her and saying that, "Oh, go away from me, do you have a bomb underneath there?" And I don't remember these remarks being told when we were in school. So now they face a greater challenge, which on the other hand gives us a greater responsibility to go out there and portray the correct Islam. That's why, after I had kids, after I had my first child, I said, I had my first child, I'm going to take a step back from speaking and presenting. And then afterwards I get these emails from young vulnerable girls in British society struggling, and I think to myself, it doesn't matter how much responsibilities I have to continue. I don't know if I'm doing any good, but if I have to feel like I am contributing back, I don't want my daughters or future girls to feel as if they are, as if they have no representative in the media or no representative that are protecting the image of Islam. So it's very important for people to become active and to portray. And I think this campaign showed that we have so many talented women in our community, so many. So it's about showcasing them and ensuring that they have a voice and people see that.
I think also I'd love to hear some of your shows about how you manage motherhood and work as well, because I think this is what so many women are facing now.
It's definitely a challenge. I mean, for all working women, it's a challenge. It is so hard, but at the same time, I think to myself, we cannot just sit back and just watch, because sometimes we have this mentality that someone else will deal with it. Every time we see someone attacking Islam, it will get better, someone else will deal with it, but it doesn't, and it's getting worse and worse. Also, we have now all these threats from people trying to radicalize vulnerable young teenagers. So it's very important that we get our right ideology out there and ensure that we have strong youngsters out there that can protect the true message of Islam.
Also, another point I was going to make is some people were saying that another point they were making is that you Muslim women, you don't have to you don't have to just automatically respond to the government's definition of what is submissive. Somebody was saying, look, you don't. The issue is not that you work, or like we were saying earlier, that just because you may be qualified in terms of university and your profession, that's like saying, so kind of agreeing with the government's definition of submit. If I wasn't working, then I would be submissive. But look, I'm working, so I'm not submissive.
I think this campaign, although yes, a lot of the women who were highlighted were women who were in work and did have a university education, etc. But I think also it highlighted a lot of women, particularly as I was saying, from our mother's generation, who necessarily didn't have that, but yet they did a fantastic job. They did work, but maybe not in sort of very high professional roles. But they still did a fantastic job. They still contributed to the community, and they still raised children who managed to get involved in society. So I think that was also important.
I understand your point, but at the same time, the government did say that in regards to integration, that Muslim communities do not integrate within society. So I think by highlighting job professions and people's job professions and the role they have within society portrays that we are integrating within society. So I think that was the main focus, and I think that's why a lot of job titles and a lot of roles that these women had were highlighted. But certainly, I mean, if you're like I mentioned earlier in the show, if you're a stay-at-home mum, it doesn't mean that you are being submissive at all. But I think the job titles were mentioned because a lot of the article or a lot of the statements were talking about integration and that Muslim communities are education and that Muslim communities are shut off from British society. So that was kind of what they were trying to counteract.
And also I noticed that what was quite nice was that the women still included the fact I'm a mother of 3 children, I'm a mother of 5 children. It's actually, look at what I'm juggling. I'm doing. I've got this, I've got that, and on top of that, I'm reading.
And for those, for example, the stay-at-home mums, that's not anything to say is anything less. I mean, a lot of those mums are very actively involved in the schools. They take part in, for example, the parent-teacher association meetings. They contribute in whatever way they can to their local communities.
Thank you very much. That was a really good discussion, and I hope that was informative for our viewers as well. Thank you, Dr. Sukeina Hirji and Sister Zahra Ahlulbayt as well. And inshallah, we will see you again next week. And do keep up to date with this campaign. The hashtag on Twitter is traditionally submissive. So take a look at some of the very witty tweets that were tweeted out to the world. And inshallah, we'll be back same time next week. And I wish you a good night. Assalamu alaikum.
Ahlulbayt TV, the holy household for every household.